If you don't need to sell right now, or if you are in possession of a really great low interest loan and you're just worried that you're going to miss your opportunity to buy something else, that's a great conversation for us to have offline. It we are recommending for some people that they wait a little while to sell if they're worried that they're going to be moving out of a low interest loan and into a high interest loan. It might make more sense for you to stay put for now if you can. But if you've got to go, you've got to go, especially if you're leaving New York City and you're ready to cash out all the equity that you've earned in your home. Those are really good reasons to be selling right now. But other things to consider when you've been thinking about selling. So the market has been in a constant state of flux for the past few years, and particularly since COVID, I'm sure you've seen everything go, like people were leaving New York, then everybody came back to New York, and interest rates were the lowest they've been, and now they're the highest that they've been in decades. And it's been a little bit of whiplash, just getting used to what's happening in the market. And the fact that there's low inventory is definitely going to work in your favor. But it's something that on a case-by-case basis, each of your individual homes is going to appeal to a different kind of market. And so things that we're seeing sit on the market for a long time right now are 4-family and up townhouses are having a harder time finding their market. But if you have something that is well priced and marketed correctly, even something that's a little bit hard to sell, you only need one buyer. We're not trying to scale this up. We're not selling widgets. We're selling one house or one property. And so we will find a way to help you do that. So one of the key things that we look at when determining this is your break-even horizon. So have you owned your property long enough? And this depends on your situation. So did you pay cash for the home? Are you done paying off your mortgage? It's not necessarily simply a time frame of ownership. Sometimes it has to do with how much you still owe on the home. But if you have owned the home long enough, and I'm going to get into that with Rashida in just a second, then it may be a good idea to sell right now. It may, if you haven't owned the home long enough that you can really break even or sell at a profit, you may want to hang on to your home a little bit longer. So Rashida, what are some of the considerations sellers should take into account beyond just what they paid for it and what they're selling it for?
So definitely money talks. So you have to figure out what is going to cost you or what your expenses are going to be now that you're looking to sell. In New York, you have both New York City, if you're in the 5 boroughs, and transfer tax, and then you also have New York State transfer tax. So depending on your selling price, the transfer tax can be anywhere from 1.825%, which is 1% for New York City, 1.425% if it's above 500,000, and it's 0.4% if it's for New York State. So regardless, you're going to have that transfer tax that you have to pay to New York State, and depending on where you are, also to New York City. So as a seller, that's a seller's expense. Also, if you're looking at a co-op, if you're selling a co-op, your co-op may have what they call a flip tax, which is sometimes depending on the number of shares you own in the co-op, or depending on a percentage of, some of them do net profit, some of them do just on the sales price. So you always want to double check with your management company or your co-op board to find out if you have a flip tax, because I've seen it as high as 3, 2, 4, 5%. If it's a standard co-op, sometimes if it's an HDFC, which is a Housing Development Fund Corporation, it can be 20, 30%. But that's a specific type of co-op. But generally, you're looking at something more of a 1 or 2% flip tax. And as I said, some of the older co-ops may be based on the number of shares. So you want to find out from a management company if your co-op has a flip tax. If you're selling a condominium, you don't have a flip tax. I do see some condos have what they call as option fees, or they may have some other miscellaneous fees. So you want to find out what your condo charges or what fees they may have that they charge sellers. Of course, you have to pay off your mortgage if you have a mortgage on the property. You have your realtor commission, you have your attorney fees, and then you have any like miscellaneous. If you have open real estate taxes, if it's a co-op or a condo, if it's a condo or a house, if it's a co-op, do you have any arrears, things like that you want to take into consideration as far as your closing costs. Also, which you don't have to pay at closing, but it is something that you need to think about, is capital gains. Because Uncle Sam, federal government, they still want to get their chunk of your profit as well. So you always want to speak to an accountant. If this was your primary residence, you do have an exemption of 250,000 if it was your primary residence for 2 out of the last 5 years. If it's a single person, 500,000 if it's a couple, so it's 250 per person. 250,000 per person. The capital gains is something that you will have to pay, you may have to pay when you do your taxes regard for that year. So you want to think about that as well. If it's investment property, if you use portion of it for rented, then you want to think about maybe deferring your capital gains. And these are things that you can speak with your attorney about, with your accountant about. There's a thing called a 1031 exchange, which can be an entire segment on itself, but it is ways for you to defer your capital gains by selling investment property and purchasing another investment property within a certain time period. And even a portion of your property, I have a client that has a two-family. One portion was being rented, the other was their primary. So they're going to do a 1031 exchange based on that rental portion of it. So there's ways for you to hopefully try to minimize your capital gains, but that is one of those things that you also have to think about when you're selling your property as well.
Oh, that's really good information, Rashida. I hadn't really thought about that, about doing a 1031 for just the rental unit in a multifamily. That's so cool. Those things that you know, because you're a real estate attorney. Okay, good. So if this is starting to make sense, then let's say if your property is what people are looking for. Desirable amenities. So if you own a condo, there's people really, since the pandemic, have started to really love amenity-rich buildings in a way that they may not have paid as much attention to previously. So buildings with gyms, pools, lounges, co-working space, those are things that are very appealing to contemporary buyers, particularly millennials. Are you in a location that people are looking for? In Brooklyn, there's a lot of really great neighborhoods, a lot of great places to live, but some come with a premium over other neighborhoods. And people are working from home, so they're looking for spaces that are bigger generally than they were. And people who were like, what, I can live in a studio, I'm at work all day, that those days have gone. So studios are actually a little bit harder to move right now than larger apartments are. Then timing considerations, do you need to move in the next 60 days, in which case you need to find a buyer who is either cash or can close really quickly. And do you have something do you have outdoor space? Outdoor space is a big premium right now, private outdoor space or even shared outdoor space. And then 1 to 2 family homes are still very appealing. Once you get to a 3-family home, you're really looking at a lot of investors more so than you are end users right now. The new restrictions on landlord-tenant relationships have led some people to back away from 3 units and above. And then parking. I love that we end on parking. Do you have parking? In which case, it's not going to be that hard for you to sell whatever you've got if you've got parking. So those are just things to take into consideration. So beyond just a price per square foot, that's the average in your neighborhood, you may have a home that is more or less desirable than what would just typically show up as comps. But no matter what you do, remember, you only need one buyer. We can find you that one buyer as long as we're doing our jobs, effectively. But where we really like to start is that, yes, you're going to sell your home at this point, but here you are at point A, you're going to get to point B. What is your point B? So what's your plan for after you sell? Are you moving out of state? Are you downsizing into something that's smaller? Are you moving up to something that's larger? Have you already identified what that property is? Do you have to sell before you buy? These are all big questions that we really want to know in advance, because that is how we're going to structure our sales process for you. It's around where you want to end up at the end of this process. It's not just about the sale. We want to make sure that when you are selling, that you are extracting from this deal everything that you need, hopefully, and more, to get you from point A to point B. So before you put your property on the market, we really want to have a plan in place for this, because once we list, things can start moving really quickly. This is the biggest part of the puzzle, is where you want to end up. And please be frank with us, your agents, about it. And please be frank with your attorney about where you want to go. It takes a while to sell, usually in New York. So we want to make sure that you are timing your sale in a way that doesn't squeeze you at the end. So Rashida, can you talk a little bit more about timing?
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say that's actually one of the big conversations you definitely want to have with your attorney as well as you enter into contract. Your contract is going to have a time period, and typically, if it's a house or a condo, it's going to say on or about 60 days. On or about means that you have an extra 30-day grace period built in. So you can push it to 90 days, but most people try to close around that 60-day time period. And that means also that you have to deliver the property vacant and broom clean in time for that closing. So as you start thinking about how quickly do you have another place to live? Are you gonna, because you have to vacate prior to closing. If you're looking at a co-op, your closing may be around more 90 plus days, because you have to get your buyer has to get a board approval, and if they're also getting a mortgage. But once again, that time period, it's not set in stone. So I always tell clients, it's a moving piece, but we do try to aim for that time period of the on or about 60, or roughly the 90-day time period. So you want to take that into consideration. And if you need to stay in the property prior to after you close, you need to have that conversation with your attorney, because there's things that we can put into the contract, like a post-possession clause for a certain amount of days. You want to have that conversation with your agent, because when they're negotiating the offer, they may want to have a conversation with the potential buyer. Are they open to a short post-possession because they're moving out of state and they need the funds to move, or they need the funds to purchase another property? So these are things that you want to take into consideration as well.
Exactly. All right, great. So we've gone through this whole process and you've decided to sell. Despite all of those caveats, you still decided to sell. Now is the time to put together a strategy with your agent and begin the selling process. So the number one thing to do is to assemble your team. So as we mentioned in the beginning, you really want a great real estate attorney associated with your deal. You don't want to be calling people after you've accepted an offer. This is something that you really want to do in advance. And you also obviously are going to need to hire a real estate agent to market your home for you. We will include you some links for like questions to ask a real estate agent, like how to interview a real estate agent. But one of the things that I think is really most important is that you find people who you feel comfortable communicating with. So where when you say something to them, they understand what you mean, and vice versa. It sounds so basic, but it is really crucial, because you are going to be in constant communication with these people for the next few months. So you need to feel comfortable with them. You need to feel that you can be honest and direct with them, and you need to feel like you're getting straight answers back from them as well. So this, I think there's a personal element to that, and not every agent is great for every buyer. Feel free to ask around and really interview people and find someone who you feel comfortable with. Beyond that, you want to make sure that there are experts in your neighborhood, experts in your building, experts in your property type. You really want to find people who are able to answer all of the questions, who really know the nitty-gritty and the ins and outs of your market, and who are active in that market right now. So things are changing week by week in Brooklyn right now, and you want somebody who is deep in it, has their fingers on the pulse, and understands how your property fits into the market. And you really want somebody who, I always think you want somebody who appreciates your home. You don't really want a listing agent who's like, your house is crappy, but I'll sell it for you. I think you really want somebody who sees what's great about it and has a plan for getting that to market. Do take the time to interview multiple people, talk to your friends who've sold recently, and see if they had a good experience or a bad experience. And then the other piece of it is that, so there are I work for a really small brokerage. Then there are really big companies. There are some people really like being part of a big team where there's multiple people working on your listing. Some people want to work directly with an agent, and they know that agent is the person who's always going to be showing the home. So it really comes down to a matter of taste, and we want to make sure that you find somebody you feel comfortable with. So Rashida, can you talk about interviewing attorneys?
Yes, so definitely. As Tina said, you definitely want to have a real estate attorney because there are certain things like your attorney is going to be holding the buyer's down payment and escrow. You want to make sure that attorney has a special, what we call as IOLA escrow account. Also, how long has the attorney been practicing? Does the attorney have support staff? Are they familiar with co-ops? Are they familiar with condos? Are they familiar with houses? Some attorneys aren't familiar with co-ops, so maybe you don't want to have that attorney represent you because they may forget that they have to, or they may not know that they have to order that stock certificate and proprietary lease that your lender has, and that can delay your closing. So find out how long have they been practicing, what type of properties or that sellers and the properties that they have represented sellers in regard to, and also regarding their support staff to make sure that they have coverage if necessary. If they have also, all attorneys should have malpractice insurance, but you definitely, because they're going to be in an escrow account, you want to make sure that they have an IOLA escrow account as well because the down payment is held there.
When you are working with an agent to put together a marketing plan, one of the things that we always advise is that you want to make sure you're telling a consistent story. So everything about the home should make sense to the buyers, from the copy to the photographs. And if you're selling a real fixer-upper, don't try to pretend it's something else. That's fine. There's people who want a fixer-upper. If you're selling a beautiful home that you've just renovated, don't sell it with folding chairs in it instead of staging. So we just want to be consistent as we go through. Speaking of staging, we also want to make a note about virtual staging. So we avoid virtual staging. It confuses buyers because buyers are going to fall in love with your home based on the photographs that they see on the internet. And then if they show up at your home and it doesn't look like the photographs, that's really disorienting for them. And so rather than make really beautiful photos just to get people through the door and then hope that they don't mind that the house doesn't look like that, we like to stage with real furniture. And staging, I think, really also helps tell the story of the home. So if you're selling something that is like a big open artist's loft, then you want the staging to tell that story too. So you don't need to make it look like a Connecticut farmhouse. So just be consistent and make sure that whoever you hire as a broker can tell that story, can sell your home the way that it is. And also just staging and styling, as I'm sure you've heard, are always going to yield a little bit more money. So there is sometimes an additional investment in that for you, but it does make a big difference. Another piece of this, though, is also just basic repairs on the home. And I'll throw to Rashida a little bit for this because sometimes there's things that need to be done, and there's some bonus things like window washing that makes a huge difference. But if there are actual repairs that need to be made, if there are open contracts or violations that need to be corrected, those are things you want to do before you go on the market.
Definitely. As you are thinking about repairs or things that you have done to the property, if you've done any alterations, primarily I tell clients is if you use a contractor, make sure that you have all of the paperwork or try to get all of the paperwork together. Also check to see if the contractor closed out any permits, depending on what the kind of work was done on the property, and if there are any violations on the property or any alterations, plumbing inspections, electrical inspections, permits. You definitely want to check your property to see if they're open. And depending on the type of repairs that you did, whether if it's a co-op or a condo, was it done in compliance with the co-op rules and regulations? Did you sign an alteration agreement with the co-op or the condominium? Because you want to have that as well. Did you combine units? So as much of the paperwork that you have, you want to start putting that aside, because when you go to sell the property in the contract, there's going to be specific provisions that if it's a co-op or a condo, is going to state that you haven't made any alterations without getting the necessary approval. Also, that you're going to close out any open permits, any open applications on the unit. So you want to make sure that all of your paperwork is together when you're doing that repairs hiring contractors, if you're hiring contractors to do any of the work. And if you're not hiring contractors, depending on what you did, you want to make sure that it was done in compliance with any rules or regulations as well. And if it wasn't, have a conversation with your attorney and with your agent so that we can prep any potential buyers to let them know that they're taking the property as is and this is what was done. And then we can figure out a strategy in regard to the sale of the property.
Yes, I think that's really important, is that if you haven't done everything right, we can still figure out a way around it. We just need to know in advance. We don't want to be, if you're selling a home that, for example, doesn't have a certificate of occupancy, that's something really important for us to know in advance. Doesn't mean you can't sell. We just want to know. If you have open violations or open permits, we may actually still be able to effect a sale with money set aside in escrow until the permits are closed, or there may be certain things that we can do. It's just going to impact who your buyer is. And we want to be clear about that from the beginning. So yes, be honest with us, and also be prepared for something to come up that you didn't even know needed to be repaired. Once you start moving things around, you're going to find, oh no, there's a leak over here, or you're just turn your air conditioners on for the first time in the season and the compressor is blown and it's not working. So there's always going to be something, and we're here to help you through that process. But let's say we've addressed all of those things, we've staged it, we've put it on the market, we priced it appropriately, and you get a lot of interest in your home right away. It can be tempting to feel at that moment that maybe we've underpriced it. That if you get an offer for the asking price right away, you can feel like, maybe I should hold out for more. What we always say is that the buyers who come in first are oftentimes the most serious buyers that you're going to see. They're the most prepared buyers, and they're ones who understand the market. And so the fact that they're offering you your asking price means that you've marketed it correctly, not incorrectly. So if we do it right, we get offers within the first couple of weeks, and then you have to start to consider those offers. So even if something comes in low, we say always counter it. Some people just want to see what's the lowest price they can get a home for, and so they'll start with a lowball offer. Don't be insulted by it, just counter it. That's what we always recommend. You never know which one of these people is going to come up to the right number, and sometimes it's the lowballers who end up becoming the best, offering the best number at the very end. So don't be offended if people give you bad feedback. Don't be offended if people offer something low. There's always a chance that person's going to turn around and become your buyer. So we also want to be prepared if there's things that you know about your home that maybe don't show up when we're showing, that are going to need to be addressed. So let's say you do know that you have to replace that air conditioning unit, but we're showing it in the middle of winter. So it's not obvious to people. Be prepared to make some concessions along the way. Because let's say we get multiple offers on the property. You accept one that is a really good number and also really good deal terms. And those buyers want to do an inspection, as most buyers do. And something like this comes up in the inspection. So even though, as Rashida pointed out, you're doing an as-is sale, sometimes you're going to want to give back a little bit just to hang on to those buyers. And so expect there to be a little bit of give and take after the inspection, if there are repairs or other issues that come up at that point. But for us, we always say that the biggest deal killer is time. When you are at that point where you're ready to be accepting offers or listening to offers and countering offers, make sure that you have set aside time and that you are available for that, because we are going to need to move quickly through that process. And we want to be in constant contact with you, getting your feedback, so that we don't lose those buyers to another home. This just happened to me, where I had some buyers who were really gung-ho about a house that I'm selling, and then they went on vacation. And when they came back from vacation, they ghosted us. And I realized later on that what happened is, while they were out of town, another house down the street came on the market. And so it was lower priced and they jumped to that house. You just want to be, that wasn't my seller's point. My sellers were totally available, but there was that little moment of time when something else came on and they scooped it up. So we want to be moving quickly. We've accepted the offer and we put together a deal sheet. So the deal sheet includes the sale price, but also the terms. So it includes if they're asking for us to repair that air conditioner, or if we are saying it is as is and no repairs will be made, or if we are making sure that there's something that we're including or excluding from the sale of the home. So if there's your grandmother's chandelier that she brought back from Murano and you're going to take that with you, that's something that we want to stipulate in the deal sheet so that it doesn't become confusing for people later on. So we put all that information in the deal sheet and we send it out to both the buyer's attorney and the seller's attorney. And then it goes back over to Rashida.
Once we get that deal sheet, depending on the type of property, things move pretty quickly. Your attorney is going to start preparing the draft contract of sale. But before they even do that, there's certain things that hopefully you've put aside because that helps the attorney also prepare that draft contract of sale. So if you're selling a co-op, you can email your attorney a copy of your stock certificate. So the attorney knows to match the stock certificate names to the contract of sale. If you're selling a house, the attorney can pull up the deed if you don't have a copy of your deed. But if you do have a copy of your most recent deed, send that to the attorney as well. If you have a copy of your owner's policy, if you purchased a condo or a house, send that to the attorney as well, because they can see what cleared when you purchased the property. If you have a survey, send that to the attorney as well. So these are things that you probably got when you purchased the property. So you want to start going through your files and putting that aside. If you refinance, if you have a mortgage on the property, get your latest mortgage statement. For a co-op or a condo, sometimes there's a lapse between when you put the property on the market and you find that buyer. So your maintenance may have gone up or your common charge may have gone up. So you always want to send your realtor, your real estate agent, and also your attorney the copy of your latest your latest maintenance or common charge statement, so that when they're preparing the contract, that's going on there as well. So these are things that you want us, as I said, put aside. So when you get that, so when your attorney gets that deal sheet, the contract can match exactly the names of the owners, the current information for your common charge and your maintenance, as well as if you're selling a co-op or a condo, the buyer's attorney has to do due diligence. So you want to make sure your agent has certain documents like the offering plan, the financials, the board meeting minutes. Well, not the minutes, but at least the management company's contact information, so that the buyer's attorney can do their due diligence and get into contract as quickly as possible. I'm in a situation where I'm representing the buyer on this end, but the seller's agent didn't have the offering plan. It's literally a month. We've been asking for the co-op documents and they have to request it, and then the seller went on vacation and they have to pay for it. And I'm stuck without being able to do due diligence. And my client is probably she wants the property, but if something comes on the market this weekend, that seller may lose someone because they didn't have all of the documents ready once that deal sheet goes out, because your agent is sending out the deal sheet and all of the documents for, if you're selling a co-op or a condo, the due diligence documents as well. So once that deal sheet, the due diligence documents goes out, your attorney can prepare that draft contract. In that draft contract, you're thinking about, is there a mortgage contingency for that buyer? Contract provides that there's going to be free of violations. So you want to make sure your attorney can probably look up to see if there's any open violations on the property. Hopefully you've done that way in advance, so it's not a surprise. But if not, at least there's a heads up before you go into contract. So you want to, all of that goes into good title. So that's why it's important, if you have your owner's policy, you can give that to your attorney, because the contract also provides that it has to have good title that has to be transferred if you're selling a house or a condominium. And also, just about going into contract, there's this it's tweaked, I say. Before in New York, there was a thing called a property condition disclosure statement or act. And before, as a seller, you would just give a buyer a $500 credit at closing, stating you've done your inspection, you relying on that inspection. I didn't give you this disclosure statement, so you're getting this $500 credit. Now, the law was tweaked that if it's a 1 to 4 family, so it doesn't apply if it's a co-op, it doesn't apply if it's a condominium. But if you're selling a 1 to 4 family house, you must prepare and fill out that property condition disclosure statement. And that has to go out with the contract of sale. So you want to make sure you at least have a sample of it. So if you have an attorney, you can ask the attorney for a sample, or you can ask your agent if they can get a sample so you can see, because you want to send that to your attorney so that your attorney can send it with the contract of sale over to the buyer side. Now, it still provides that the buyer can only rely on their inspection. So it's just to your actual knowledge. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't have information or you have to do any research as a seller, it's just filling it out to the best of your ability and making sure that's one of the documents that you have as you go into contract or sale.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit more about contracts. So your buyers have done their inspection, you've done the contracts, gone back and forth between your attorney and the buyer's attorney, and the buyers have signed their contract and given a deposit of 10% of the purchase price, which is now being held in Rashida's Iola escrow account. And now you are officially in contract. That may be really tempting to just sit back and relax, but in fact, the expected time to process all of this is between 30 to 45 days and 90 days and so that clock is really ticking for you as sellers as well. First of all, you have as Rashida pointed out, the on or around closing date, which can be pushed 30 days into the future from that date. But let's say that's the date that we want to be planning around, that we want to be able to move out of the home in advance of that date. The buyers are going to be doing their due diligence, and Rashida can tell you a little bit more about that. But in the meantime, for us, we want to make sure we're working on that sort of how are we going to get you to point B? Is there furniture that you need to move? Is there furniture you need to sell? Are you downsizing and you want to get rid of some things? Now is the time to start thinking about that, but not actually doing it. The temptation is really to start packing right away, dismantle the house, we sold it. Just because you're in contract, if you have a financing contingency, the buyers are actually also going to be doing an appraisal. And the appraisal is ideally the condition of the home at the appraisal is the same as it was when the buyers came through and saw it and when the photos were taken. And so you have to keep your home photo ready until the appraisal is complete. Once the appraisal is done, you can start moving things, but until you have a commitment letter from the bank, if your buyers have a financing contingency, there's a chance your house will have to go back on the market. Can you speak a little bit to that, Rashida?
So contract of sale is going to have a couple of things, is contingencies. And the main one typically is that financing contingency. What that means is that the buyer's getting a loan, and if they're not able to get that mortgage, they have a right to cancel the contract and get the return of your deposit. Typically, it's 30 to 45 days for that time period. During that, the buyer's lender, as Tina has said, is doing the appraisal on the property. If it's a co-op or a condo, they're approving the co-op and the condo as well. So and if anything goes, unfortunately, if let's say their bank isn't able to approve the co-op or not able to approve the condominium, then the buyer isn't able to get their loan. So even if your buyer has a pre-approval, things like that, there still is that time period of that mortgage contingency that they do have a right to cancel the contract and get the full return of the deposit. Some sellers do they get all of their money back? Yes, they get the full return if it's according to that contingency. And if it's a co-op, you also have that co-op approval contingency. So you want to take that into consideration as a seller as you do the timing of when you plan on moving, because if they're not approved by the co-op, they also could cancel the contract and get the return of your deposit.
So that's ideally like that. It's a real rarity for that to happen. It is uncommon, but we don't want you to have already moved out of the house or signed a lease for something else until you're really quite certain that your property is going to close. So we do just want to keep that going. But also during that time, any repairs that need to be done, anything that came up during the inspection that you're going to be required to do, just get on top of that stuff right away, because closing can sneak up on you. Life is busy. You live in New York City, and so don't wait until the very last minute to do everything that needs to be done. Because as we get close to your closing, within 48 hours of your closing, the buyers are going to do a final walkthrough in the home. And so at that point, you need to be moved out. The house needs to be broom swept. Any holes that are larger than the size of a dime in a wall need to be repaired. They don't need to be painted over. They don't need to be perfect, but the holes need to be gone. And anything that has been agreed to in the contract. So if there were little things that came up that needed to be fixed. So oftentimes there's like issues with electrical outlets, or there are bulbs that are blown in places. Now your home does not need to be perfect. You're not selling a new construction. You're not a developer selling a new construction condo. So they can't just come in and be like, I really want a different paint color there. But everything mechanical does need to be functioning. It doesn't need to be brand new, but it needs to be functioning. And if there's any issues with any of that, the sooner we know about it, the better. I've gotten a dishwasher repaired on the day of a closing. There are things we can do at the last minute, but generally speaking, it's easier to do it a little bit further in advance.
Just to talk about the scheduling of the closing and what you should be doing with your attorney. Your attorney is the one, once the buyer gets their clear to close or it's approved by the co-op and it's now a matter of scheduling, your attorney is going to be working with the other side's attorney to get a date that's I guess everyone's calendar is available on that particular date. So there may be a situation where you may not be able to attend the closing. So you can give your attorney power of attorney to close on your behalf. So you want to have a conversation regarding that, because closings are done in person. They have to have original signatures on the deed, on the transfer documents. If it's a co-op, on that canceling the stock certificate. So it's not done virtually, even though you may have signed your contract electronically. At the closing, there has to be someone in person to sign the documents. And that's where it's about giving that power of attorney if you aren't able to attend in person at the closing. And as Tina had mentioned, prior to the closing, it has to be vacant and broom clean. So the buyer has to do their walkthrough. At the closing, the keys have to be delivered, mailbox keys, all of the keys to any of the entrance ways and things like that. So you want to arrange, if you're not going to attend the closing, either giving it to your agent or giving it to your attorney to make sure that they have the keys. Utilities, I can't stress this enough. Do not turn off your utilities until after your closing. You don't want to shut off services because your buyer has to do the walkthrough, has to turn on the lights, has to make sure the gas and the stove and things are working. So don't do anything until after the closing. So these are things that we're going to be talking to you about as a seller. Have that conversation. Your closing is typically about an hour and a half to 2 hours. You're getting the funds at the closing. So you're getting bank checks. If it's done via power of attorney, your attorney may be wiring you the funds after the closing. So you want to have conversations with the attorney about where the funds are going, timing wise for that as well. And as I said, your keys are delivered at the closing. But now you've got all the information you need regarding preparing yourself to get into that closing date. And as a seller, you're probably signing for maybe 15, 20 minutes of documents, the transfer tax documents, the deed, the canceling your stock certificate if it's a co-op or if it's a co-op. But all of that is done at the closing, and is either you're in there in person or you're giving your attorney power of attorney to close on your behalf.
And then that's it. There's a long process to get to it, but on that day, you will get a pretty substantial check in most cases, and then you never need to speak to any of us ever again. But we hope that you've had such a good experience with us that you will come back, and we really have. What I love about this more than anything is just getting to know people, and working with clients is such a joy, and a lot of those people who we've worked with in the past become our friends and we stay in touch. So Hopefully it's been a positive experience, but if it hasn't been a positive experience, at least you get a nice big fat check at the end of the process. We also have a lot of great resources on our website. We're going to send you the link to that. They're free and available for you to use and to share. And all of our classes are available on our YouTube page. We'll give you a link to that as well. You can look back in time and see what Rashida and I looked like years ago, which is pretty much the same actually. But if anybody has any questions, I don't think we have any questions in the chat, but if there is anything that you want to ask us, you're going to have all of our contact information shared with you, and please do reach out. There's no cost to just having a conversation. It doesn't imply an agency relationship between us. Do feel free to reach out anytime and ask any questions that you might have.
Good evening, everyone, and hopefully we imparted some great information and you're ready to put your property or have the information necessary to think about selling. Great seeing you, Tina, and
Yeah,
have a
seeing
great
you.
afternoon.
Yes, thanks, and have a great Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you, too.
Okay, take care.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
guys.